At 6:42 in the morning, the coach knocked on room 214. No answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. When hotel security opened the door, the beds were untouched. The players' boots were still lined up against the wall. Their phones were charging beside the television. But the two men who had slept there were gone, and they were not the only ones. By sunrise, 7 members of the team had vanished. Their biggest match was only 12 hours away, and nobody knew whether they had escaped or been taken. The club was called Atletico San Verano, a small team from a forgotten industrial city. For most of its history, San Verano had been invisible. They played in a crumbling stadium. Their dressing rooms flooded when it rained. Their supporters worked in factories, warehouses, and shipyards. Nobody expected greatness from them. Then something changed. A new owner arrived. His name was Rafael Varga. He appeared without warning. No interviews, no public history, no photographs before the day he bought the club. He promised new training facilities, better contracts, a return to the first division. Most people laughed. But within 3 years, San Verano had climbed from near bankruptcy to the edge of the national championship. They did not play beautiful soccer. They played like men being chased. They pressed until their lungs burned. They tackled as if every loose ball contained oxygen. And they kept winning. One goal, 1 point, one impossible escape after another. By the final week of the season, San Verano needed only a draw, one result against the country's most powerful club. A draw would make them champions, the greatest upset the league had ever seen. The city prepared for a celebration. Schools announced they would close early. Factories changed their shifts. Thousands of supporters traveled overnight. But inside the team hotel, nobody was celebrating. Because 2 days before the match, the players received an envelope. There was no stamp, no return address, just one sentence printed on a white sheet of paper. Some victories cost more than defeat. At first, they thought it was a joke. Then the captain found the same sentence scratched into the door of his apartment, and that was when the team began to understand. Someone did not want them to win. But the real question was not who, it was why. The official story began at 7:15 that morning. The club announced that several players had broken team rules. They had supposedly left the hotel during the night. The statement called it an internal disciplinary matter, but the explanation made no sense. The missing players had left everything behind: wallets, passports, car keys, medication, even the captain's wedding ring was still on the bathroom sink. Security footage showed nobody leaving through the lobby. Nobody used the elevator. Nobody entered the underground garage. The hotel had 12 floors, more than 200 rooms, and only one staircase without a camera, a narrow service stairwell at the back of the kitchen. At 3:17 a.m., the camera outside that staircase lost power. Exactly 4 minutes later, it came back. 4 minutes. That was the entire gap. And during those 4 minutes, 7 professional footballers disappeared. The hotel manager insisted it was an electrical fault. The police accepted his explanation. The club refused further questions. But one member of the coaching staff did not believe them. His name was Mateo Ruiz, the team's assistant equipment manager, a quiet man who had worked at San Verano for 22 years. Mateo knew every player. He knew who taped his left ankle, who needed 2 pairs of socks, who prayed before kickoff, and who never slept the night before a major game. One of the missing men was the goalkeeper, Daniel Ochoa. Daniel suffered from insomnia. Before important matches, he wandered the hallways, sometimes for hours. Mateo had seen him do it dozens of times, so he asked hotel security to check every camera from the night before. Not just the exits, not just the staircase, every corridor. That was when they found something. At 3:12 a.m., Daniel stepped out of his room. He looked toward the camera, then down the hallway. A man was standing near the service stairwell. He wore a dark suit. His face was hidden by the angle. Daniel walked toward him. They spoke for less than 10 seconds. Then Daniel turned around. He hurried back to his room. 3 minutes later, the camera went black. When it returned, Daniel was gone. But before the footage ended, Mateo noticed something else. Daniel had been carrying a piece of paper, a small folded note, and as he returned to his room, he opened it. For a single frame, the writing faced the camera. The image was blurred, almost impossible to read, but one word was visible: families. The threat was no longer aimed at the players, it was aimed at everyone they loved. And there were still 11 hours until kickoff. By midday, the city was filling with supporters. They marched through the streets wearing red and black. They sang outside the stadium. They climbed lampposts. They lit flares beneath giant banners. None of them knew 7 players were missing. The club kept the news quiet. The league said the match would proceed. San Verano still had enough registered players to field a team. Barely. The substitutes included 2 teenagers, a reserve goalkeeper who had not played in 18 months, and a 36-year-old defender recovering from a torn calf muscle. The coach, Elias Moreno, wanted the game postponed. The league refused. He wanted the police to investigate. The police said there was no evidence of a crime. He wanted to speak publicly. The owner stopped him. Rafael Varga entered the dressing room 3 hours before kickoff. Most of the players had never heard him raise his voice. That afternoon, he did not need to. He stood in the center of the room. He looked at every man. Then he said, "You will play." Moreno asked him where the missing players were. Varga ignored the question. Moreno asked whether they were alive. Varga stared at him for several seconds. Then he repeated himself, "You will play." The owner turned to leave, but before he reached the door, the reserve goalkeeper spoke. His name was Tomas Velez. He was 29 years old. He had spent almost his entire career on the bench. He asked the question everyone feared. "What happens if we win?" Varga stopped. For the first time, his expression changed. Not anger, not fear, something closer to pity. He looked back at the players and said, "Then pray they keep their promise." Nobody needed to ask who they were, but the meaning was clear. The missing players were still alive, for now, and the match itself was part of the deal. At 7:30 p.m., San Verano walked onto the field. The stadium shook beneath them. 40,000 supporters screamed their names. Fireworks exploded above the stands. The players looked toward the crowd. Somewhere among those faces were their parents, their wives, their children, people who believed this was the happiest night of their lives. The referee blew the whistle. For the first 15 minutes, San Verano barely touched the ball. Their opponents passed through them with ease. The players were distracted. Every tackle came late. Every clearance fell short. Every time someone in a dark suit moved near the tunnel, their heads turned. In the 23rd minute, San Verano conceded. A simple cross, a free header, 1-0. The stadium fell silent. The score meant San Verano would lose the championship, and strangely, several players looked relieved. Maybe defeat was the price. Maybe losing would bring their teammates back. But then, just before halftime, something happened. Mateo Ruiz appeared near the bench. He had been missing since the team arrived. He pushed past a security guard. He shouted for the coach. In his hand was Daniel Ochoa's folded note, the note from the security footage. Mateo had found it beneath the bed in room 214. The full message read, "Lose the match and your families live. Win the match and nobody returns." But on the back, Daniel had written something himself. 3 words, "Do not obey." Moreno stared at the message. He looked toward his players, then toward the director's box. Rafael Varga was watching. Behind him sat 3 men nobody recognized. They were not celebrating. They were not speaking. They simply watched the field. The referee signaled halftime. San Verano walked into the tunnel, 1 goal behind, and inside that dressing room, they had to make a choice. Lose deliberately and trust the people who had taken their teammates, or fight back and risk never seeing them again. But there was one detail nobody had considered. Daniel Ochoa had written, "Do not obey." Why? Because he had seen something before he disappeared, something that proved the threat was already a lie. The dressing room was silent. No music, no tactical board, no motivational speech. Only the distant sound of thousands of people stamping their feet. Coach Moreno placed the note on the floor. He told the players they could decide. Not him, not the owner. Them. One by one they spoke. Some wanted to lose. They had children, parents, people who could be targeted next. Others believed surrender would not save anyone. The kidnappers had already broken every rule. Why would they honor a promise? Then Tomas Velez raised his hand. The reserve goalkeeper, the man who had waited his entire career for a night like this. He pointed to Daniel's 3 words, "Do not obey." Tomas knew Daniel better than anyone. They trained together every day. They shared hotel rooms. They competed for one position. Daniel was cautious, almost painfully careful. He would never gamble with the lives of 7 men, not without a reason. Tomas believed the missing players had discovered something, maybe an escape route, maybe the identity of the men behind the threat. Maybe they knew losing would change nothing. The captain's replacement stood up. He pulled on his shirt and said, "If they wanted us to lose, they should have taken all of us." The others followed. When San Verano returned to the field, something in them had changed. They were still afraid. But fear can make a person retreat, or it can remove everything except the next step. San Verano began to attack. Every pass moved forward. Every tackle became harder. Every player ran as if the match were a message. In the 68th minute, they equalized. A corner, a deflection. The ball fell to a 17-year-old substitute. He swung without looking. The shot struck the underside of the crossbar, then crossed the line. 1-1. The result they needed. The stadium erupted. But in the director's box, the 3 unknown men stood up. They left without watching the replay. Rafael Varga remained seated. His face had gone pale. San Verano survived another 20 minutes, then 5 minutes of added time. Their opponents attacked again and again. A shot hit the post. A header passed inches wide. In the final seconds, Thomas made the save of his life. He pushed the ball over the crossbar. The referee checked his watch, then blew the final whistle. San Verano were champions. The city exploded. Players collapsed onto the grass. Supporters climbed over the barriers. Red smoke covered the field. But the team did not celebrate. They looked toward the tunnel, waiting for a message, a phone call, anything. Nothing came. And for the next 43 minutes, nobody knew whether they had won a championship or signed 7 death sentences. At 9:06 p.m., police received an anonymous call. It came from a warehouse near the old harbor. Officers found the missing players inside, alive. Their hands were bound, their faces were bruised, but they were alive. The kidnappers were gone. So was every piece of evidence that could identify them, except for one thing, a ledger, hidden beneath a metal cabinet. It contained payments, dates, initials, and the names of referees, club executives, and government officials. For years, powerful figures had manipulated matches throughout the league. San Verano's championship threatened more than one wealthy club. It threatened an entire system. A small team winning the title would expose patterns that had remained hidden. Unexpected transfers, suspicious penalties, players who suddenly refused to compete, and millions of dollars moving through shell companies. The kidnappers did not take the players because San Verano was too strong. They took them because the team had become unpredictable. Daniel discovered the ledger after being forced into the warehouse. He saw the names. He understood that losing would not protect them. The kidnappers could never release witnesses who knew that much. So before they removed him from the hotel, Daniel left the note beneath the bed. Do not obey. He was not asking his teammates to risk his life. He was warning them that surrender would not save it. The investigation lasted nearly 2 years. Several officials resigned, 2 referees were banned, 3 executives were arrested. Rafael Varga disappeared before he could be questioned. His car was found near the border. The driver's door was open. The keys were still inside. He was never seen again. San Verano kept the championship, but the club was never the same. Some of the missing players retired. Others left the country. Daniel Ochoa returned for one final match. When he walked onto the field, the entire stadium stood in silence. Then they began chanting his name, not because he had made a save, not because he had won a trophy, but because in the darkest moment of his life, he understood something most people learn too late. Obedience does not always bring safety. Sometimes the people demanding your surrender have already decided your fate, and sometimes the only way out is to refuse to play the role they wrote for you. That was San Verano's real victory, not the championship. The choice to stop being afraid of losing to people who had already taken everything.